Today we'll be diving into the crazy life of Jeffrey Hudson, a 17th century dwarf who is oftentimes compared to Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones. Although, apart from their dwarfism and seemingly endless adventures, in reality they don't have that much in common. Unlike Tyrion Lannister, Jeffrey wasn't born into royalty. He came from a peasant family, but curiously enough, he made his way into the Queen of France's inner circle. Jeffrey was born in England on June 14, 1619, in the small town of Oakham in Rutland. He was born into a poor family with 3 brothers and a half-sister. Very early on into his childhood, it became evident that he was different from his siblings, especially in stature. By his 7th birthday, Jeffrey was only 18 inches tall. Dwarfism in this age was very misunderstood, and given their inability to help out with daily chores or work and provide for their family, they were often pawned off into the entertainment industry. Royal courts all across Europe welcomed these little people and used them as either servants or court jesters to entertain themselves. Famously, Natalia, the sister of Russia's great Tsar Peter the Great, was recorded to have 93 court dwarves at her disposal. In 1626, Jeffrey Hudson turned 7 years old and was given to the Duchess of Buckingham as a gift. He lived with her in her household for a few months until she passed on the present to King Charles I and his young French wife, Queen Henrietta Maria. During a banquet for the royal, the Duchess surprised them with Jeffrey by hiding him inside a large pie and placing it on a dinner table. Suddenly, little Jeffrey, still standing only 18 inches tall, bursted out of the pie dressed in a miniature suit of armor. The stunt was a success as it brought a wave of laughter and applause. The queen was delighted with her gift, and Jeffrey's new life was set into stone. She brought him back to her residence and he lived with the queen inside her inner entourage in London. He quickly became known as the Queen's Dwarf or Lord Minimus. Hudson was educated in the Queen's household and learned the manners of the court. He was brought up in the Roman Catholic Church of her household. He was even taught how to ride a horse, and was made an elaborate ivory saddle of velvet, silver, and silk fringes. He often spent a lot of time with other curious members of the Queen's possession, namely a monkey named Pug, 2 other dwarves, and a Welsh porter named William Evans, who was reportedly a man of such excessive growth that he was labeled a giant. Hudson and Evans developed an act in which Hudson would emerge from the giant's pocket along with a loaf of bread, which he would later use to make a sandwich. As he matured, Hudson learned to amuse and entertain the court with his wit and courtly behavior as well as his appearance. He would oftentimes perform in elaborate shows dressed in costumes along little Sarah, the other little person in the household. This is mainly what his life consisted of until he was around 25 years old. Although seemingly living almost a fairy tale story, things were not always so wonderful. His first major hurdle was back when he was 10 years of age in 1630. Jeffrey was picked to be part of a mission to France to find a midwife for the Queen's first pregnancy. Not much is known about his specific duties, but he was most likely sent in order to entertain the French court. During the return journey across the channel is where Lord Minimus got his first taste of danger. Their ship was captured by pirates and plundered for its loot. Luckily though, the pirates were in either a good mood, or they knew better to push their luck against the British royalty as they eventually released the ship and all its passengers. Years later, back in England, a civil war was brewing. By 1640, the relationship between King Charles and the Parliament had soured. To such lows, armed conflicts broke out between the royalists and the parliamentarians. The Queen took her entourage, including Hudson, to the Netherlands in order to try and raise money for the military support of her husband. She was able to pawn off some of her belongings in order to raise funds, but unfortunately was denied official support from the Dutch government. By this point, the Civil War was raging, and during all this mess, the Queen for unknown purposes decided to appoint Hudson as captain of the house. Unfortunately though, no records exist of whether our newly titled Captain Jeffrey Hudson commanded his own royalist army or even saw combat during these wars. Nevertheless, historians have uncovered evidence in letters written by the Queen that Hudson was a skilled horseman and a crack shot with a pistol. With the war reaching its climax, and the Queen's safety at risk, she and Jeffrey fled back to France in 1643. This ultimately would mark a grim turning point in Jeffrey Hudson's life. Now officially a titled gentleman, he became tired of the ridicule, and life as a jester of court was no longer what he wanted. And on one such evening in 1644, William Crafts, the captain of the Queen's Lifeguard, taunted and ridiculed Hudson so severely that the Queen's Dwarf challenged the captain of the Queen's Guard to a duel. Duels at this point were outlawed in France, and many people warned Jeffrey against using such antics, but he clearly found it necessary to defend his honor. Accounts from the time say Crofts initially showed up with a squirt gun, at first believing the whole situation to be a farce, but quickly he realized that this was no laughing matter as both men were given actual weapons. According to the historical record, they were equipped with pistols and then mounted on horseback. After the signal, both contestants galloped towards each other and fired. Crofts fell from his saddle dead with a bullet hole in his heart. Because the practice was illegal, Jeffrey Hudson was charged with murder. Initially, he was sentenced to death, but the Queen pleaded for mercy. With this, he packed his belongings and bid farewell to his adoptive royal mother. Hudson, now 25 years old, chartered a ship and started the journey across the English Channel. Again, misfortune hit this unlucky soul. For the second time in his life, his ship was overtaken by pirates. This time though, he wasn't under the protection of royalty. He was taken to North Africa and sold as a slave. Unfortunately, no details of his long 25 years in captivity were recorded, except one fact: he had grown over 45 inches, in essence doubling his height. He attributed this to the abuses and mistreatment he had suffered at the hands of his captors. The date and circumstances of his rescue or redemption are also unknown, but it was in the 1660s that several missions were sent from England to Algeria and Tunis to ransom English captives, and his first documented presence back in England is in 1669. He returned to his hometown in Oakham and was finally able to live out his life in relative peace and quiet. It wasn't until 1676 where he reappeared into history. That day he traveled back to London, presumably in order to try and recoup a pension for his earlier services in the royal court. He must have quickly regretted this decision, however, because when he arrived, he was thrown into the middle of a rabid anti-Catholic activity and was thrown into prison. His only recorded offense was being labeled as Roman Catholic. Here we arrive at the unfortunate end of his life. He spent an agonizing 5 years in prison before being released and died 2 years later on an unknown date, in unknown circumstances, buried in an unmarked Catholic grave. His life, full of adventures and seemingly incredible circumstances, is surely one of the most incredible stories of any human who has ever walked this planet. The uniqueness and sheer ridiculous nature of his life will surely mean that Captain Jeffrey Hudson will forever live on in our minds and imagination. Thank you for watching today's video, guys. If you have any recommendations or topics you'd like me to do, please leave them in the comments, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.